Hey, you're listening to the Centre podcast. We're a church based in Dural, Sydney, who love Jesus and so want to make him the centre of our lives, our community, and our world. We're going to learn how to do that right now as we sit down and unpack Sunday's sermon. Well, how's it going? Thanks for joining us again. This is Banter. My name is Murray.
And I'm Mitch.
And we are continuing through our Sermon on the Mount series. Mitch, thank you for the teaching on Sunday. As you kind of mentioned, a bit of a oft-quoted, oft-misquoted passage as well about judgment. Then sort of a kind of weird passage about some pigs and some dogs, and we'll hop into that in a bit. Yeah. But before we get into it, I was racking my brain. I'm like, what's a good icebreaker today? I was thinking Jesus is using some sort of carpentry language here, right? Like sawdust and a plank. So my question to you was, and whatever you say, mine will be worse. Okay. So you're in a safe space. What is the most handy thing you've ever done?
Ooh.
In the heart of Jesus's carpentry work.
Ooh. Built a retaining wall.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, at Chester Hill. That was pretty fun.
Yeah. So kind of quite a few bricks. Are we talking
it was
about
logs.
Logs.
So, yeah, we built a log retaining wall for the front garden. Yeah. And then we built. So how the house worked was we had a shared driveway. We owned the front place. Yep. And then the shared driveway. Battle axe. Yep. And then to get the second car in, we converted part of the garden on the side of the driveway into a car spot. So we built another retaining wall and filled it. Yeah, that was pretty handy.
Pulled the log out of your eye and you built a retaining wall with it. I love it. Look, that is pretty handy, man. As not many things that I've done that are particularly handy. Honestly, I think putting just together a piece of IKEA furniture is probably as handy as I've gotten.
Done that too.
Look, it's the absolute lowest bar, isn't it? I'm trying to think of anything else.
You can say that, but some IKEA furniture is really difficult.
Yeah, I feel like it's getting more intricate.
Yeah,
maybe I'm just buying more expensive pieces as I get older.
I remember when can't remember what it was, but we bought some sort of office set with drawers and crikeys. We got to step 20 and realised that we'd stuffed up at step 3 and had to... that was pretty intricate. And the instructions aren't always the clearest.
No, and that pressed corkboard is not always the most forgiving when you're unscrewing a screw and putting it somewhere else. But yeah, I think the other thing that's difficult about IKEA is they decide to have international manuals that have no words on them, which you and I also experienced the other week when we were trying to put together our new baptismal pool / hot tub.
Yes, and then what was funny was all the videos. People were like, oh my goodness, this is so much better than its useless instruction manual. And these were videos that weren't even made by the company. They were just random people showing you how to do it.
Random dude in Essex being like, all right, this is how you do it. Love it. So good. Yeah. So good. Well, as we jump into this passage today, it was something that we sort of mentioned on Sunday, that it's oft misquoted, probably by Christians and non-Christians alike. This idea of judgment. It's not necessarily something which is a very sexy word for 2024, and maybe something which had some slightly different understandings, connotations, maybe even interpretations in Jesus's usage of it here. How are we to come to this really tricky word, judge? Yeah,
well, let's put on a Greek hat for a minute. So I can thank Jonathan Pennington for this. I'm stealing this from his commentary. So the Greek word krino, which we translate as judge, has what's called a semantic range, broader than just... Because when we think of judge in English, we just think condemn. To judge someone is condemnation. Yeah. But judge, krino in a broader sense can mean to evaluate, to discern, to separate, or decide. And so it's quite broad in that sense. It's not just condemnation on someone. Yeah. And I guess too, at its core, krino or judging, it's about justice and dispensing justice from a judge. And so when we read that word, do not judge, we're thinking, well, do not condemn people. Yeah. Totally. I had when I was preparing this, I was thinking of Tupac's. Tupac the rapper He had that song, Only God Can Judge Me.
Cool. I call him Tupac.
Cool. Oh, is it Tupac?
No, I think it is Tupac. It's okay. Tupac Shakur. I'm like, Tupac. I'm thinking of two hockey fucks. Sorry. Okay. Sorry. Tupac Shakur. Yes.
The rapper. Like he had like a song, Only God Can Judge Me.
Yeah.
And that's kind of tied in with that idea. It's like, well, I can do whatever I want because only God can judge me, and you can't judge me. You can't tell I'm doing wrong. And
totally.
Like, no, that's not what Jesus is talking about. And I've heard it from other Christians, like, we're not meant to judge people. It's like, well, in a sense, yes, we are, but not in the way that you're thinking of. You're thinking of judging as in condemning people. As Pennington points out, is like, well, if Jesus meant that, like, we can't condemn people, he's a hypocrite himself, because later on in chapter 7 he talks about, a tree by its fruits.
Yeah, totally.
A good tree produces good fruits, bad tree produces bad fruits, so stuff like that.
Use your judgment.
What he's talking about, and I like what Pennington says, is a better translation is do not judge unfairly.
Yeah.
This is talking about like hypocrisy. It's like don't condemn someone, don't judge someone in that sense, and then be doing the exact same things yourself. The Apostle Paul talks about this in Romans chapter 2. It's like, hey, you who teach others, do you teach yourself? You say, do not steal. Are you stealing? And you don't commit adultery. You're committing adultery, and et cetera and so forth. And so it's probably aimed at disciples / Pharisees / those in the crowd who thought that they were better than others or excluded from behaviour. There's the whole, I like that saying, a rule for thee but not for me. A sense, a rule for you but not for me. And Jesus saying, like, if that's what you're doing and you're condemning others, judging others, well then you're actually putting a measure against yourself, and that will be held against you. And it's quite fascinating. We've kind of mentioned a couple of times that Jesus isn't really reinventing the wheel. He's like tapping into some like Jewish and Old Testament like kind of wisdom. And so there's one passage I found from a book called Syriac, which is a Jewish intertestamental book. It says, this is Syriac 18:20. Before judgment comes, examine yourself, and at the time of scrutiny you will find forgiveness. So there's an idea there of saying, okay, like examine yourself, like kind of do the whole log extraction thing from your eye, and if you do that, you'll find forgiveness from God. And so there's a few people who notice there's a little bit of like Jesus clearly like taking that concept that's familiar in Judaism and applying it here in the Sermon on the Mount. That's probably the biggest thing. I think even for me, like I found it hard because I'm just so used to hearing judges' condemnation and an idea, we're not meant to judge people. But actually, in the sense of we're meant to point out what others are doing wrong, but first after log extraction. Yeah,
I think that even the interesting thing is it's sort of this really tricky thing when you try and put yourself in the shoes of a translator. You realize that in some ways judge is actually a really great word, because in English it does also have that semantic range. You can have a judge as far as somebody who's at an Olympic level judging. Some person is still going to get gold. This idea of judging can also be a reward and recognizing somebody who's doing something good in a discerning way. And I even sort of thought of the way of judging in assessing something, assessing, different wines, and kind of saying like, what are the sort of characteristics of this wine? So being a judge, although it's definitely, I think, a really strong connotation for us when we read that white-wigged gavel judge in a law court, there are actually a range of the idea of being a judge. So having good judgment is this kind of idea, which I think is really, really helpful. And then as he's sort of talking about this log and this sawdust, or speck, it's quite hyperbolic as well. He's using this really exaggeration language here, which is really interesting as well, because throughout we kind of continue to see that Jesus is using sort of wisdom literature style language. He is speaking in ways, and even, later in the, do not give dogs what is sacred, do not throw your pearls to pigs, these really strong evocative language. So the idea is, even though it seems extreme, this log in your eye, it's to really make this idea of a greater point of hypocrisy. And I think it's kind of really helpful for us to look at this, because really you see how Jesus kind of had a bit of a sense of humor as well. Like, it's kind of a bit of a ridiculous image, and there does seem to be some comedy in it. And I just love that it brings a little bit of, I don't know, humor to Jesus. You show that he maybe had a little bit of spark, a little bit of personality. He was not just real serious sermonizer.
Yeah. Well, I think that was like the point of the recreation of my childhood drawing.
Yeah.
About the little stick man with a log in his eye. It's like, it's pretty ridiculous sort of image.
Totally.
And and it's also just as ridiculous to have something protruding out of your eye and telling someone, "Oh, look, let me fix that for you."
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what's powerful about a lot of the metaphors Jesus used. It really cuts to the heart of if you've got deep issues in your life, how can you think that you can help others do that? And it's a language. Like I said on Sunday, I spent a long time, because one of these things that I've heard a lot about, you just got to remove the log from your eye.
Yeah.
No one actually really explained how to
do
it.
That's good. It's not good, but it's good that you recognize it.
Yeah, I was like, and I felt okay, how does that look?
Yeah.
Like, what does that look like?
Yeah.
And I said, I was sort of imagine telling someone, I've noticed this sin in your life, but don't worry, I have removed the log from my own eye before approaching you. That would feel even more hypocritical and judgmental.
Totally.
And so, and I said it was one of those flashes of do you ever find this, that when you're searching for things and just come across something random on Google?
Yeah.
And it's just like this flash, and I just saw, it wasn't even like it's just, I just saw this little word in you get the little bio on each website and the Google search. It just had self-awareness.
Yeah.
I was like, that's it. That's what he's talking about, self-awareness. And that's where it kind of led down this whole pathway. I'm like, the X-Men.
Yeah.
And looking at that way, and actually starting with that. It'd be helpful if Jesus actually gave us a step-by-step guide to what that looks like, but
absolutely,
he doesn't. So we're sort of, I guess, part of the wrestling with is sort of finding our own tools. And I think what struck me about the X-Men is just how it speaks into the contemporary language of emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
And I think that's what shocked me the most was, I've heard of it. I'd never really done the practice. I kind of knew it existed.
Sure.
I looked at other Ignatian prayers before and done them, the imaginative stuff. But and kind of reading both secular and Christian, like Pete Scazzero, who I quoted on Sunday, he talks about how leaders with low self-awareness are emotionally unhealthy because they're not aware of what's going on inside of them and all that. And it's that's really common things now. Talk about your EQ and your emotional intelligence. It's the big buzzword around it. And then to see, Ignatius was doing that 500 years ago.
Yeah.
I was like, there's really nothing new under the sun.
Yeah.
And this is actually I guess a spiritualized form of becoming self-aware. There's he's a business psychologist, Henry Weinsinger, and his book Emotional Intelligence, I quite like that. It's from the 90s. And he has in his opening chapter about how to become more self-aware, one of the exercises he recommends is keeping a feelings journal. And it's something that, I can't remember which school, some MBA school would actually make their first years do a feelings journal as part of their training, because I
can imagine all these slick-haired sort of business guys being I didn't come here to learn about this.
I guess Weinsinger's sort of his mantra is that you gotta let your behaviors, your emotions work in your favor. And so if you're angry all the time and snappy, stuff that's very easy to say but hard to do. And so anyway, it's just interesting that his book, which I'd read a number of years ago, I haven't got that sort of exercise, and then coming across the X-Men, I'm that's what Ignatius was calling us to do, but a lot more spiritual sense of and what's a few people ask me, and so we'll put it on the pastor's desk for this week, but there's an app, let me pull out my phone, the app that I referred to, and like I said, it'll be there on the pastor's desk, it's just called Examen. It's the first one if you Google it into App Store. I don't know about the Play Store, but it's got a little cloud. It's the Examen reimagined. And so what the app does, and there's a book that comes with it, is that it's because a traditional Examen is become aware of God's presence, review the day with gratitude, pay attention to your emotions, choose a feature of the day and pray from it, and then look forward tomorrow. He's sort of got it specifically about areas in your life that you might be facing. And so, there's things of like, I won't go through them all, there's about 20 here, but identifying inner wounds, shifts in my spirit. Was I present or absent? My relationship with God, self, and others, a pending decision, how I treat others today, today's surprises, like what do I seek, my past, present, future. So quite detailed, and that's what he sort of said in it, like just trying to make it a bit more contextualized for the modern world. And he, like, if you're looking for, say, forgiveness of others, like he has like the opening verse. I found that quite convicting when I did that, about treating others well and seeking forgiveness. Like he uses that passage from Matthew 25, whatever you did for the least of these brothers of mine, you did so for me. I'm like, ooh, like that's okay, that's pretty challenging. Totally. That's a great place to start. So, a really cool tool. And like I said on Sunday, it's not going to make you perfect. It's not going to transform you. Like, well, hopefully it will transform you. But it won't make you a perfect disciple. You won't be sinless. You're still going to stuff up, but
it's not going to transfigure you.
Transfigure you. That's a better saying. Yes. But it's a much healthier place to start, I feel. And be starting to live out what Jesus' words of like being a log remover is.
Very cool. And I think emotional intelligence is such a huge thing, but I also think a huge part of that then leads to, through the act of that examen, that self-examination, having a social intelligence as well, and then knowing how to remove that speck from the brother's eye, knowing how to interact with somebody with empathy, just a high social intelligence. And they are kind of built on top of one another, that it is really only when you have developed a robust emotional intelligence that you can then have an effective social intelligence. And so much of the Sermon on the Mount is so communal, so other focused, and really thinking about how can you engage not just with God well, but with others well. That's kind of the whole kicker of the sermon, right? And then you kind of get into this part where in verse 6 he starts talking about, do not give dogs what is sacred, do not throw your pearls to pigs. If you do, they may trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces, which can on face value seem a bit out of context. A bit just sort of like, okay, cool, let's
what do we do with this?
That's interesting.
And depending on how you want to interpret it, you can take it in one of many ways. So one reading is that it's just a random insert that Matthew's made, because dogs and pigs are sort of words to use of Gentiles, so it's like, the pagans won't understand this, so don't give to dogs what's sacred, don't throw your pearls to the pigs because I'll just trample it. So it's almost like, my teachings are only for like my followers. I don't know, it just feels like, I don't know, I'm not overly sold on that. That's just me. I feel like I don't think it's just there randomly. That's one. Another one is to say, this is probably the view that I like better, is that it's kind of part one about is like judging like hypercritically, then need to be able to discern what's right and wrong. So in the sense of, okay, don't be overly critical, but then at the same time too, don't just sort of let things slide. Is almost another way of like, okay, remember that this is sort of precious. Don't just like, what's the word I want to say? Show discernment about how you do things.
Don't be overly lenient. Don't be overly critical.
Show discernment. And so, and that's probably where I sit with that. It is a bit of an odd expression. If most, and like some commentators too, put verse 6 as part of the whole not judging and sawdust. Some not connected in with the ask, seek, and knock. Yeah. Some just see 7 verse 1 to 12 as all as just one unit together. I guess a lot of this is a little artificial because really the Sermon on the Mount's meant to be read in one giant sitting.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
But there is a bit of like Old Testament stuff, like around the different proverbs about being careful with sacred things. Jesus isn't fully reinventing the wheel.
Yeah.
But it is a little odd, but I see it more around that concept of discernment, about showing discernment, about what you're doing, how you're judging. And look, there's some people, here's what I was looking for. So there's like a few references in the Old Testament from Proverbs about, so Proverbs 9:8, do not rebuke a mocker, he will hate you. Rebuke a wise man, he will love you. Like there's that sort of idea there.
Absolutely.
Do not speak to a fool, for he will despise the wisdom of your words. That's 23:9. So 26:4, do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you yourself will be like him. Yeah. That's what I sort of see it as. It's like riffing off some of that wisdom literature, and probably more in, say it more in the context of around that discernment of how you discern with others.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Treat them. So
I like this this message paraphrase, as Eugene Peterson himself called it, but he said, "Don't be flip with the sacred. Banter and silliness give no honor to God." I hope that's not the case of our podcast. Don't reduce holy mysteries to slogans. In trying to be relevant, you're only being cute and inviting sacrilege. Interesting.
Because that's another thing too. Like the sacred can like mean like holy things or holy food, and so there's sort of like a almost ritual element behind that, and so some people will kind of go down that route, like Jesus is talking about, like a sacredness of not sort of spoiling that. But anyway, I probably say the simple thing is like just having discernment around what you're doing. So if you're pulling out your log from your eye and helping another to see clearly, also remember like not to be throwing away like your pearls of wisdom. So having that discernment. And then like who said it? Michael Wilkins. That's his commentary. Sort of like don't be hypercritical, but also don't have naive acceptance. He sees that sort of as a bit of a thing to be mindful of.
I think the more that we reflect on this, the more we recognise it's actually a very pertinent challenge for us today, when we're trying to live in a gospel of grace, but yet still trying to uphold holiness. Christian values. It's a tricky tension that I think this is a lifelong challenge. It's not something that we're ever going to perfect, and I think that each situation has its own response worthy of it. So it really does take a discerning spirit, I think. And as you said on Sunday, that constant self-reflection, self-examination. I think even another sort of subheading of this section could have been self-awareness, in not only who you are, but how you engage with others and how other people can be best helped. It's I think a really helpful challenge for all of us, especially living in a space where we all have contacts who aren't Christian, and we all probably, unfortunately, have contacts who are Christian and not doing it very well. And it kind of applies to both of these people, whether it's the speck for the Christian or the pearls to the swine, so to speak.
I think all of it comes down to, and this is not in the sermon, there's a couple of passages from Paul. So first one from Galatians about this idea of like speaking the truth in love. And so it's just from Galatians 5:19. He says, "My brothers, if one of you should wander from the truth and someone should bring him back, remember this, whoever turns a sinner from error of his ways will save him from death and cover over a multitude of sins." If again, that kind of goes back to the earlier point. If Jesus meant judgment as condemnation, then like Paul's saying here that we're meant to do this, so we have to help people kind of come back. And then it's and it's from Galatians. Brothers, if someone is caught in sin, you who are spiritual should restore him gently, but watch yourself, or you also may be tempted. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. So that's Galatians 6:1-2.
Yeah, that's a really interesting interpretation of it as well, looking at in this way of, if you were really struggling in a certain area, say, I don't know, alcoholism, and then you're trying to help another friend through it, and you end up sort of falling back into that pattern of behavior yourself. That could sort of, again, in your attempt to sort of help, to throw a pearl to swine kind of thing, you end up having it crushed yourself. So
I guess actually, I realized I misspoke. The first passage about wandering from the truth came from James, not Galatians. It's James 5:19-20. I need to clarify that.
Tricked me, mate.
Put a little caveat on that. Someone goes looking for it. There's no Galatians 5:19. I was like, it should have been James 5:19, and then Galatians 6:1-2. But and that's But like for what you're saying there, like alcoholism is a great example, because that's about the log sort of removal. Yeah. Well, perhaps you're not the best person to be dealing with this.
Yeah. And then it's like a discerning thing, because I think that AA seems to recognize that there is a great strength in somebody who is truly conquered that, being able to be somebody who is a sponsor for that person. And it's so this real tricky thing of, again, the log being taken out of the eye almost gives you strength in it, but it also needs to be making sure that it's not going to make you fall back into that. When you quoted that James 5:19, I couldn't help but think, because you said that the correction would sort of cover a multitude of sins. And I couldn't help but think of the passage in 1 Peter 4, which is love covers over a multitude of sins. And it's interesting because we don't often think of correction as love, but it is, right? It's the two sides of the same coin.
Well, it's like what parents do. That the kids are probably more Hazel than Asher, but at the stage now where like don't understand why punish them for wrong things. They really need to be like, hey, like, this is why I'm doing this. One day you'll thank me when you become a mature adult. I don't kind of get it at the time, but it's actually unloving to not discipline a kid.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
That's sort of the challenge. And I like what Scazzero says. Reading and listening to a lot of his stuff of late, and it's just as Christians, like as a whole, just so poor at managing conflict and poor behavior. And I think what we feel is being loving is actually being very unloving by not sort of helping to like, hey, like this is not good behavior. Hey, this is like what we expect.
Just enabling bad behavior by not addressing
under this like sort of pseudo guise of just trying to show love and patience and grace, and actually not. Like it's there's I like to say there's a reason why Paul wrote most of his letters, because churches were very unhealthy and needed correction.
Absolutely.
So I'm glad he did do that correction. Otherwise, we'd be poorer without it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I just speak from my own experience in my marriage. That's something where, when Em speaks into a part of my life in a way of correction, that's actually a real place of privilege as well. And it's a place that people earn. And I think it just comes back to as well this recognition that, it's about building that relationship. And if you truly are loving, the other as yourself, your neighbor, your brother, your sister, that is really a sort of a foundation of relationship that you can then actually receive correction. And I think that, it's just a good challenge for us to not just do discipleship well, but do community and relationship well. Right?
And it's probably a critical part of discipleship. And like that quote I had from Scazzero, where he says that lots of times in his teachings about Christians are like just not warm, nice, caring people, and he even puts himself in that boat. He goes, I was a bit like that. There's and I think there really is nothing new under the sun. He says a lot of these Christians do the spiritual disciplines, they're attending church, they're reading their Bibles, but there's no inner transformation. It's just very outward. And it's like, sounds very much like the Pharisees. We like to think that we're not like, but I think deeper down human nature falls into those traps. They're just different sort of rituals. And coming back to that place of, to use the modern word, self-aware, or become a log. A log lifter, log puller outer. That's a
retaining wall builder. So good. Well, look, as we wrap up today, any kind of closing thoughts on this passage?
Look, one of the good things about Jesus' teaching, it's quite self-contained. It kind of means what it says. It doesn't need a whole lot of unpacking for. I guess one of those things that it's quite short, but the ramifications for living this type of life is challenging, very challenging to be a log puller, but very deeply rewarding. And also, too, I suppose you'd have to confront, to use Scazzero's language, confront your shadow, and that can be hard because there's stuff that we don't want to confront, or stuff that's buried deep down. We're like, don't want to deal with that. So, part of it I see like pulling the log isn't just I've kind of dealt with that surface level sin or surface level issue, but it's actually going a lot deeper to pull out. And I guess if we were all doing that first and foremost, there'd be I guess we'd have there'd be a lot more specks in our eyes, I guess, to use Jesus' sort of analogy there. We'd be pulling out specks from each other's eyes left, right and centre, not just pulling out specks in the sense of we're helping to discern, helping to guide, and helping to shape one another in a way that, So, all this stuff, easy to say, hard to do, but I guess if you're serious about this, I would just, recommend doing the Examen. That's just a place to start, like that 15 minutes of,
so good.
Spiritual discipline.
So
transform
good.
Your life.
And we might put a link to that app in the show notes if you want to click on board, and Mitch will put it through in the pastor's desk on Sunday or Friday. Easy. Yes. Well, we are hopping into the next part of the Sermon on the Mount, sort of Jesus's closing part of the main chunk before he sort of wraps it all up. But there's kind of been some interesting readings I've been looking at this week, seeing this passage that we were just talking about, the pigs and the dogs, sort of almost being a linchpin between these two parts, which we're going into the ask, seek, knock, and what prayer looks like, which I think previously I've always seen this passage being a very individualistic Westerner as ask, seek, and knock for myself, but what that then relates to relationally, not just with God obviously in prayer, but for other people.
So, I've seen this verse used very, very misappropriate.
Well, hopefully that's not the case this Sunday.
So, here's justification for any sort of prayer they need.
We're going to be praying for private jets this Sunday, guys. So get on board. Bring your prayer beads. It's going to be a blast. Well, thanks for the chat as always, man.
No, thank you. I'll see you all next week.
See ya.
Bye.
Thanks so much for joining us. Don't forget to rate and subscribe to help others discover this channel. Check out the description if you want to find out more or get in touch with us at the Centre Dural. But in the meantime, praying for God's hand over you as you continue to step into everything Jesus has in store for your life. Be blessed.